Free traders around the world can raise a glass today to a new economic alliance. It's the overhauled Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was given a new name after the U.S. pulled out last year. Now it's the Cptpp, or the TPP 11. That 11 refers to the number of countries who've signed on, and Canada is among them. The CBC's Janice McGregor has the details.
If Canada's serious about diversifying its trade, it needs new markets in Asia, and that's what the CPTPP is really about. The U.S. pulled out after Donald Trump took office, but the 11 other countries in the deal didn't let that stop them. By late October, 6 partners had ratified the revised deal, and that brings it into force today. Its second round of tariff cuts phases in almost immediately because, of course, 2019 starts next week. Years of negotiating work are starting to pay off. Here's what International Trade Diversification Minister Jim Carr had to say before leaving Parliament Hill for the holidays.
We were among the first 6 nations, so we get 2 cuts in tariffs within the first few days of this agreement, and that will be very impactful. And if you talk to the producers and exporters, they will tell you what kind of significant advantage that gives to them and therefore to consumers.
The most important country in this deal is Japan. It has a lot of consumers, but it's a highly protected market, especially in agriculture. Canadian beef, for example, faced tariffs as high as 39% before now. I spoke to Brian Innes, who represents grain and livestock farmers who rely on global exports. He offered this example of what they're gaining from this deal.
Right now we can ship a lot of unprocessed raw seed into Japan, but the tariffs on canola oil prevent us from value adding and shipping canola oil to Japan. If I go back for decades, in fact, it's been a policy priority of the canola industry, and so they've been gearing up and being ready for this for some time, and it's really amazing that it's finally going to happen.
Vietnam is also in this deal. That's a very fast-growing and developing economy with an emerging middle class. 10 to 15 years from now, it could be consuming a lot of Canadian food and Canadian services as well, like insurance. For Canadian consumers, though, there's not a lot that's going to change in the short term, unless you're shopping for a car right now that happens to be built in Japan. The 6% tariffs on those car imports are starting to phase out now. So soon, you might be able to negotiate a better price at your dealership. Janice McGregor, CBC News, Ottawa.
As we mentioned, 11 countries have signed on to the deal. That's a market of nearly 500 million people. The countries now part of the deal account for about 13% of the world's GDP. Now, the deal removes tariffs on an estimated 95% of goods. It will also create greater protection for intellectual property, and it includes provisions to improve minimum labor standards for workers in the member countries. For a closer look at the deal and what it all means for Canada, we have brought in Mark Warner, an international trade lawyer. So glad to have you with me to help explore this further.
Thanks for having me in.
So from your perspective, is this a good deal for Canada?
I think it's a good deal. It's an important deal. You know, for many years, I think Canada was seen to be China-focused in Asia because of our great opening in the early 70s. And I think the rest of the region has sort of wondered how serious we were. We seem to be on and again, off again. We're not always present. So this is a great marker. Plus, it's an advantage for us because since Donald Trump pulled out of an agreement that Obama wasn't able to get through the Senate in the United States, we are there alone without the United States. So it gives us a bit of a first mover advantage for some of our agricultural products in particular in terms of selling into the Japanese market for beef and for pork. So that's an advantage for us to make of it what we will. If we are aggressive and get a presence in many of those markets, we may be able to keep it if or when the Americans come in.
Is it the export market for farmers that is really the big winner for Canada in this, as you say, getting out ahead of the U.S.? Many American farmers upset that now the U.S. isn't part of this. I
think so. I think that's, you know, in part because the agricultural markets are the most protected markets in Japan. Famously, their rice and their you know, other agricultural products. So for us, that's a big ticket win for us to get into. Canadian consumers probably won't notice it as much. We might have been able to notice some of the concessions that were made in terms of dairy, in terms of access for agricultural products, of dairy products from New Zealand and Australia. But we won't notice it very much because the way the import quotas that were given, they were given to the Canadian dairy processors, which probably have an incentive not to actually distribute the lower tariffs back to the consumer. I just have a hunch.
Now, we know that the Americans can, if they want to, join on at some point. Are there any other advantages to Canada right now to the fact that the Americans are not part of this deal?
Well, I think, I don't really think so. I think the one thing in autos, we never really liked the rules of origin changes that were made in autos. Canada kind of went on at the last moment, reluctantly agreeing to lower the thresholds for how much of a car had to qualify as having regional value content. And we went the opposite direction in the new NAFTA, USMCA, which is probably more to the liking of our auto parts producers. So there's perhaps some advantage for having Canadian parts being shipped into Asian producers. But realistically, Japanese producers are not selling in Canada for just the Canadian market. They're selling to sell cars across the American market. So they're going to be more focused on the current NAFTA rules of origin and the soon-to-be, hopefully, USMCA rules of origin standards. So I don't think we'll see much change there.
Okay, so let's talk more about the fact that the U.S. President Donald Trump pulled out of the deal. It was part of a promise he had made during the campaigns. Given the sensitive relations right now between the U.S. and Canada, what impact do you think that will have on our trading relationship with the U.S.?
I don't think it really will have too much of an effect. I think the interesting question, in the short term, from the American point of view, I think it really is more Canada's trade with China that's the flashpoint. Now, were China to one day try to become part of the TPP, or this, whatever they're calling it now with the too many consonants, if they were to become part of that, and if there were some changes, particularly to the intellectual property or the state-owned enterprises provisions, then I think the Americans would be sensitive. And that's why I think in the USMCA agreement, the new NAFTA, they added this clause that said if we're going to do anything with China, we have to consult and notify and consult with them first.
Yes.
So I think it's really more, they're more focused is really on the China aspect, although their agricultural producers will not like the first mover advantage that we have, and will be putting pressure on the Americans to either join the TPP in some form or to do their own bilateral deals with the same countries.
Final thought, Canadians moving forward, it takes effect today. Will they notice much difference from this deal?
I don't think, from the point of view of consumers, will notice very much. If you are someone in the services industry that wants to try to work in certain sectors as a professional services in those 11 countries, right now there are only 7 that are part of it, but if the other ones will soon to be on, or if you are an exporter, you might notice the advantage of the reduced tariffs. Really, this is an opportunity more than a big bang event. It's really going to be what we make of it, and we have the great opportunity here. And let's hope our traders do something with it.